Hi everyone, my name is Mark Aaron Polgar, and I'm a fifth year PhD student in the Sissel program at the University at Buffalo. For today's spotlight, I'm going to be talking about Dr. Deborah Tannen for this narrative spotlight for LAI 687 Narrative Research and Method with Dr. Mary McVie. So, just a little bit of information. Dr. Deborah Tannen holds the rank of university professor as well as professor of linguistics at Georgetown University in Washington, D.C. I'm going to be talking just briefly about why I chose Dr. Tannen for my narrative spotlight. So, Dr. Tannen's primary research interests include discourse analysis and conversation analysis. She identifies as a sociolinguist and a discourse analyst, and that's one of my main research interests as I was pursuing my master's degree 20 years ago at the University of Waterloo. My background is in sociology, so my BA and my MA is in sociology, and my master's thesis was a discourse analysis of Holocaust denial web pages. So I explored racism and hate online, and I focused specifically on Holocaust denial websites to examine the abusive counter-narrative that Holocaust deniers actually engage in developing against the narrative of the Jewish Holocaust. So I wanted to explore anti-Semitism online and how Holocaust deniers attempt to attain legitimacy and credibility in how they design the content and organize their web pages. So conducting a discourse analysis, I investigated the text and the images and identified the different themes that emerged and looked at the different rhetorical strategies that the Holocaust deniers engage in. So I was really informed by Dr. Tannen's work on discourse analysis, and that's the reason why I chose this narrative spotlight for Dr. Tannen, because her earlier work, when she first started her academic career, was really on narrative analysis, and then her research has evolved over many years into discourse analysis and conversation analysis. And of course, as I'm going to conclude in the presentation, she does a full 360 and actually returns to narrative in her latest publication from September of this year. So, as I'm going to continue, so Dr. Deborah Tannen was born in Brooklyn, New York in 1945, and she's the youngest of three siblings, three sisters, and she's the daughter of a Polish father and a Russian mother. So she is the child of immigrants, and her work has been influenced by a strong oral tradition of storytelling amongst Eastern European Jews who've come to the United States, and that was really part of her upbringing. Growing up, she is recalled hearing endless stories from her lawyer father about his childhood, and also from her mother, an electrologist, about her clients. So Deborah Tannen, Dr. Tannen, attended the Hunter College High School, which is affiliated with Hunter College, which is part of the CUNY system, which is the City University of New York, which is a public urban university system, which is comprised of 25 college campuses in New York City. She then went to the SUNY system to Harper College, which is now known as Binghamton University, part of the SUNY system to pursue her BA in English. And then she actually moved to Greece and met her first husband, and I'll talk about that soon. And then she returned to the United States to attend Wayne State University in Detroit, Michigan, where she finished her master's in English and then pursued another master's degree in linguistics at the University of California, Berkeley in 1976, and then proceeded to complete a PhD in linguistics at the University of California, also at Berkeley. So she identifies as a sociolinguist, and her PhD is in linguistics. And her dissertation involved the analysis of a 2.5-hour conversation during Thanksgiving between 2 Christian Californians, 3 New York Jews, and a native of England. So as you can see, her research interest really focuses on conversation analysis and intersects with gender as well as ethnicity and geography. And so that intersection of different geographic groups as well as ethnic groups with gender really focuses and forms the majority of her research interest after she departed from narrative analysis. So as I mentioned, after her BA, she lived in Greece for 4 years where she met her first husband, and a lot of her research at the beginning of her academic career really is based on her writings comparing American English and Greek narrative and different oral and written narrative strategies and different narratives, comparing those two different groups. She is one of 6 faculty members at Georgetown University with the rank of university professor. And she's also the recipient of 5 honorary doctorates. Because of her research has been able to target both scholarly and general audiences. She's actually become very, very popular amongst the general audience. And as I've mentioned in the previous slide, she's actually made a lot of different television and media appearances, both on television, radio, and in a variety of different professional publications. So she's become like an academic celebrity. So she's been on Charlie Rose, as well as the Oprah Winfrey Show, and Sally Jessy Raphael, as well as Martha Stewart. And in terms of news programs, she's been on CBS This Morning as well as 2020, and she's been in different professional publications such as Forbes magazine, Psychology Today, as well as the Harvard Business Review, and of course, credible, popular newspapers such as the New York Times. Last but not least, my favorite, she's been on PBS NewsHour because I've actually watched her on PBS NewsHour. So she's actually become a celebrity because a lot of her publications have actually reached the general audiences, as I'm going to be showing you in a few moments. So Dr. Tannen's research interests include conversation analysis, as well as the power dynamics and the power relations between men and women, focusing on specifically on discourse and how men and women communicate and interact with each other. She also focuses on both narrative analysis and discourse analysis, and she's also coined the theory genderlect. So I'm going to talk about genderlect really in a few moments, but genderlect is really a theory where men and women have difficulties in communication because they have differing dialects. And that's also something that's interesting because Dr. Tannen really focuses on heterosexual relationships and focusing between men and women and how they communicate with each other. So it could be slightly problematic because a lot of her research is very heteronormative and she doesn't focus on other kinds of relationships, but really focusing on men and women. So a lot of her earlier writing in the late 70s and early 80s focuses on narratives of Greek women and also the narratives of siblings, most specifically her own siblings. Her writing has evolved into conversation analysis, and she is currently the author and editor of 25 books. She's the author of 4 scholarly books and 9 general audience books. and she's the editor of 12 anthologies. She's written over 100 academic articles, and as I mentioned before, her general audience books and media appearances have made her a sort of celebrity. So her earlier writings really focus on comparing Greek women's narratives with narratives that are in American English and focusing on the differences in language. And I've provided a very select list of references that she's written that focus specifically on narrative. So again, we've never been close, we're very different, 3 narrative types in sister discourse. And then other articles focus on the different Greek and American conversational literary narratives. So she's trying to integrate both conversation analysis, narrative analysis, as well as discourse analysis. So I really, really enjoy this integration of both narrative and discourse. And that's why I chose her. Some other articles focus on spoken and written narrative in both English and Greek, and also looking at oral and literate strategies in spoken and written narratives. So there seems to be a theme going on that she's written in the late 70s and early 80s that really focus on narratives, specifically Greek and American English. Finally, one of her articles is a comparative analysis of the oral narrative strategies between Athenian Greek and American English. So her research interests in the early 1980s is really focused, but it has since changed with the publications of her more popular books. So I've actually found some quotes by Dr. Tannen that really resonated with me, and they're very interesting, so I'd like to just mention them. So one of her quotes is, "Each person's life is lived as a series of conversations." And this is taken from one of her books, You Just Don't Understand, Men and Women in Conversation. Another quote is, "Life is a matter of dealing with other people in little matters and cataclysmic ones, and that means a series of conversations." And that's taken from That's Not What I Meant, How Conversational Style Makes or Breaks Relationships. And I mentioned the theory of genderlect is really the masculine and feminine styles of discourse, and it's viewed as different dialects as opposed to opposing inferior or superior ways of communicating with each other. So here's a list of some of the books that she's written that has really appealed to general audiences. Her first general audience book was in 1986, and it's That's Not What I Meant, How Conversational Styles Make or Break Relationships. You Just Don't Understand, Women and Men in Conversation. Talking from 9 to 5, Women and Men at Work, and focusing on professional discourse. The Argument Culture, Stopping America's War of Words. I Only Say This Because I Love You, Talking to Your Parents, Partner, sibs, and kids when you're all adults. You're Wearing That? Understanding Mothers and Daughters in Conversation. You Were Always Mom's Favorite, Sisters in Conversation Throughout Their Lives. And You're the Only One I Can Tell, Inside the Language of Women's Friendships. So there's a common theme in a lot of the general audience books that she's written. A lot of them are very much self-help books, but they really focus on interpersonal communication and trying to understand and decipher the meanings of how people communicate with each other. And I find that very, very interesting. And it really focuses on analyzing language and the small stories between how people communicate. So the four scholarly books that she's written include Lalika Nakos, which is a biography of one of the first women who's written Greek prose, and this woman was a very famous, prominent Greek journalist. Dr. Tannen has also written a book entitled Gender and Discourse, as well as Conversational Style, Analyzing Talk Amongst Friends, and Talking Voices, Repetition, Dialogue, and Imagery in Conversational Discourse. As I conclude this presentation, I can't believe I've completed it on time. Dr. Tannen has actually returned, and she's actually done a full 360. And since she started her academic career in 1979 when she graduated and when she actually began to work at Georgetown University, from when she graduated University of California, she has actually done a full circle, and she's returned to narrative in her most recent publication called Finding My Father: His Century-Long Journey from World War I Warsaw and My Quest to Follow. This book was actually published in September of 2020, so very recently. And Dr. Tannen just talks about the many years in which I believe it was over a decade, where she was collecting information through different interviews with her father before her father passed away in 2006 at the age of 97. So the focus of this book is how she's trying to piece the puzzle of her father's life through interviews, and she also captured conversations that she taped and she recorded and transcribed from over 200 cassette tapes. And she's trying to trace her father's life story by asking him how he remembered his childhood as part of a large extended family in the Hasidic Jewish community in Warsaw, Poland. And her book really focuses on the stories of her father and his memories of the family as he lived in Poland during World War I, and how he moved to New York City at the age of 14, and how he was able to survive and finally become a lawyer later on in his life. So I found that reading excerpts of this book was very interesting because Dr. Tannen actually returned to narrative research. And I want to conclude by mentioning that Dr. Tannen does not have a teacher education or a K-12 education background. She's actually has a background in linguistics. So it's interesting to note that narrative research actually spans through many disciplines, and I'm very pleased that I found Dr. Tannen's work very interesting, and I really connected with a lot of her work, and I've read a lot of her scholarly articles as well as her general interest articles and books, and they're very entertaining and very funny, and it's just very interesting that she's been teaching at Georgetown University for a very, very long time, and she's had quite an established career. So I hope that you found this narrative spotlight interesting, and I look forward to engaging in conversation on the discussion board about Dr. Tannen. Thank you very much, everyone.